Okay, it's time again for the Press Box Podcast. This is episode number 110, our college football recap from Week 14, the Conference Championship Week. Some really exciting Conference Championship games, a few upsets that we weren't expecting, and our college football playoff is set. We have our top four teams. We'll get into that, Nathan and I, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the Conference Championship games in depth, some of the upsets, and some of the things that we thought were interesting as well as surprising. So this will be episode 110 of our college football recap for Week 14. Remember to hit us up on Twitter at PressBoxPod, on Instagram at PressBoxPod, and of course the YouTube channel, the PressBox Podcast. So without further ado, this will be the PressBox Podcast College Football Recap, Week 14. Okay, welcome back to the Press Box Podcast. I'm your co-host, Ralph Miranda. I'll be joined by my co-host and producer, Nathan Miranda, in just a moment. This is our weekly college football recap. The college football season has come to an end. All our championship games were held this past weekend. We now have our four playoff teams. All the bowls are set, and we're ready for the college football postseason, if you will, that will start pretty soon here. I think the actual first bowl, if I'm not mistaken, will be Saturday, December the 18th. So that's only, maybe about 10 days away before we get into bowl season. Of course, the ones that matter will be a little bit later in December and into January 1st. But let's start, as we do every week, by recapping our top 25. Now we have finally reached the top four who will be in the playoff. The playoff rankings, Alabama will be number 1. Michigan will be number 2, Georgia will be number 3, and Cincinnati will be number 4. Cincinnati becoming the first non-Power 5 conference team to get a playoff spot by virtue of their 13-0 record. So the playoffs will start, or the actual playoffs will be number 1 Alabama will play number 4 Cincinnati. Those teams will play, let me get that schedule real quickly for you. Number 1 Alabama will play number 4 Cincinnati. They will play in the Cotton Bowl, which is this year one of the semifinal games. That game will be on Friday, December 31st. It will be a 3:30 Eastern Time kickoff. Number 4 Cincinnati, number 1 Alabama. Number 2 Michigan will host, which is not really a good word, but they will be the higher seed. They will play Georgia. In the other semifinal, that game will be in the Orange Bowl at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. The kickoff will be 7:30 p.m. It will also be on Friday, December 31st. And then, of course, those two teams will meet in the national championship game. The national championship game will be held on January 10th, I believe, and that game will be in Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. So those are your top four teams in the playoffs, and then I'll round out the rest for you. Notre Dame finished number 5, just one spot out. Notre Dame was number 6 going into the week. They needed 2 upsets to happen for them to get in. They got one of them. Number 5, Oklahoma State lost to Baylor in the Big 12 championship game, but they could not get any of the other ones. They needed either Georgia to beat Alabama, Iowa to beat Michigan, or Houston to beat Cincinnati. The most likely one going in would have been Georgia beating Alabama, but Alabama, you could say exposed Georgia, you could say dominated Georgia, you can say whatever you want, but they defeated them soundly. Michigan took care of business against Iowa, and Cincinnati ran away with their game in the second half. So Notre Dame finished 5th. Ohio State finished 6th. They did not play in the conference championship game. Baylor, by virtue of their Big 12 championship, finished 7th. Ole Miss finished 8th. Oklahoma State was 9th. Michigan State was 10th. Utah, the Pac-12 champion, finished 11th. Pittsburgh, the ACC champion, finished 12th. Brigham Young 13, Oregon 14, Iowa 15, Oklahoma was 16, Wake Forest 17, North Carolina State 18, Clemson all the way up to 19th at 9-3. Houston was 20th, and then the rest of it really doesn't matter much. So that's it, Nathan. We finally, after 13 weeks, if you will, of or 14 weeks, I guess it was. 14 weeks of college football. We finally have our 4 playoff teams. Any surprises to you?
Well, I'm surprised at some of the outcomes of the conference championship games, which maybe we'll get into. But as far as the rankings, I guess no real surprises considering how the championship games played out.
Right.
I'm not really surprised, but I wonder why they put Michigan at 2 and Georgia at 3. I know it doesn't matter. If Georgia was 2, Michigan 3, they were still going to play each other.
Doesn't really matter, right.
But I'm a little surprised. I would have thought they would have dropped Georgia one spot, maybe. Maybe the way they got beat. Maybe if it was close, they would have only dropped in one spot.
Right.
But I was a little surprised at that, I guess. Outside of that, I'm not really surprised at anything,
Were you not surprised a little bit how easily Alabama dominated Georgia?
Right. I was surprised in the games themselves.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay.
I was surprised. Obviously, Alabama had a lot more to play for in that game than Georgia did.
Correct.
Some of that maybe has to do with that.
Correct.
I don't know. Alabama, they couldn't hold anything back in that game. Anything that they had to show, they were going to show it.
Right.
Georgia, on the other hand, knew that no matter what happened, they're going to be in the playoffs. So you never know. Maybe they didn't want to show some things. I don't know. But
they were playing for a conference championship, though. I mean,
I know.
I understand what you're saying, but
I guess my point is, once they start getting down to the players and the team, they know, like, okay, well, we can take this loss maybe.
Right.
I'm not saying this is what they said, but if Alabama gets down that game, they have to win.
Yeah,
it's different. You know what I mean? Or if it's different than Georgia would get down early in a playoff game, they have to win. But I don't know. I'm just saying that plays into it. I think maybe a little bit. But I'm still surprised. I was surprised Michigan too beat Iowa 42-3. I would have thought that was going to be a closer game.
I would have thought so too. It was 14-3 at the half.
Yeah, at one point, Friday, Oregon got beat by Utah.
Right.
So then at one point, it looked like all the higher seeds were going to be upset. I mean, Baylor
right.
beat Oklahoma State.
Right.
At one point at halftime, Alabama-Georgia game was close.
Right.
Could go either way.
Right.
Cincinnati-Houston game was pretty close. Could have gone either way. And Michigan-Iowa was the same thing.
Right.
So at one point, it looked like there was a good chance that they could have all lost.
Right.
I mean, of course, these were at different times. So once Alabama won, you knew they weren't going to lose. But you know what I'm saying.
Right.
And I keeping up with the Cincinnati-Houston scores throughout the game, I don't know. I thought Houston could have maybe pulled it out, but they obviously didn't. What were your what's your take on this, specifically the Alabama game?
I guess I take a little bit of a different take than you do, even though I respect your take, and I think it's very possible.
I'm not saying that's the only reason.
No. I know that. I'm just saying that I think with Georgia being 12-0, I think they wanted very much to knock Alabama out.
That's true.
Okay, and I think they knew that if they lost that game, they were more than likely were going to have to play Alabama again. Okay, because I mean, let's face it. I know anything can happen, but I really don't see Cincinnati beating Alabama. Okay, I mean, if Alabama plays like they did against Georgia, that game will be a blowout. All right. Yeah. So Georgia knows now that to win a national championship, they have to beat Michigan, which is likely. And then they have to beat Alabama, and they haven't been able to do that. So I think, the old saying, when you have a chance to knock out the champ, you better knock him out or he's going to win the fight on points. And I think that's Georgia had a chance to knock him out, and they couldn't do it. And the thing that was so strange about it is Georgia had a 10-0 lead late in the first quarter, early second quarter, whatever it was. And then their defense, I mean, Alabama dominated.
They're supposed to have such a great defense. What was up with that?
Well, they couldn't contain the quarterback. I mean, they couldn't get to him. He ran a lot. He threw a lot. But, I just thought the defensive plan was poor. They didn't make any adjustments at halftime that I saw that stopped it at all. It was just a very strange game. I mean, the halftime score of this game was Alabama 24, Georgia 17. So they were very much in the game at halftime. And they couldn't really make any adjustments to stop it. And I don't know. I mean, I guess if they turn around and win a national championship, all will be forgotten. But I think you still would have been nice to win your conference championship undefeated and knock your biggest rival completely out of it.
I think you're right. I think wanting to win a conference championship is important to the team, I think. But also maybe more important is knocking Alabama out of it.
Exactly.
Because A, they don't have to play them, and B, they would want to knock one of their rivals out, I think.
And the key is not to have to play them. I mean, because you look at it this way. If Georgia would have beaten Alabama, more than likely they would have played Notre Dame. And we've talked about that. I did not see Notre Dame beating Georgia. They might have made it competitive, but I didn't see them beating Georgia. And then you would have had Michigan play Cincinnati, and Michigan, either way, whoever won that game probably wasn't going to beat Georgia. So not only would they have knocked Alabama out, I think they would have had an easier road to a championship. And they just had no answers for the Alabama quarterback. I mean, he was unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, give Alabama credit. I guess I'm just trying to think of a reason why the score was how it was because I'm so surprised. But maybe the reason is just they're not as good as Alabama. But after watching Alabama all year, I don't think they're as good as past Alabama teams.
No.
I just don't. In this game, I mean, this game is the outlier, but I mean, they almost lost to an Auburn team with the third-string quarterback who had one leg.
Yeah.
Could barely move.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So I still think Georgia's the favorite to win the national championship. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I agree. I think Georgia's going to play Alabama for the national championship. Okay, but I think I don't know that I see unless your theory holds true. In other words, let's say in the second half it was 24-17 at halftime. I'm not saying this happened. I'm just saying it happened either. I'm just saying. Let's say that I think Alabama scored first to make it 31-17.
Yeah.
I mean, let's say they thought, hey, look, we're not going to beat this team today. Okay,
right.
So let's play a vanilla defense. I don't know, and maybe they'll have something for Alabama come championship game. Possible, okay? But from what I saw, unless they can figure out a way to contain the quarterback and play better coverage on those receivers, I just don't see them.
And not only from a coaching standpoint, but from the players' standpoint, this is obviously not the way they should be thinking, but who knows how they think. Maybe when it was 31-17, maybe the players were like, who cares? We'll get them next time.
Right.
Get this,
Right.
And they just kind of relaxed from that point.
Could be.
Who knows?
Could be. I mean, could be. And really, if you look at Georgia, I mean, I hate to say this because we didn't do it all week long. I mean, the funny thing is, all year long, we were talking about how Georgia was the unquestioned number one football team and how they were just dominant over everybody. But now, the fact that this game happened the way it did makes you kind of look a little bit at their season, right? I mean, the only team they played, if you really look at it, that was ranked highly was Clemson opening week. And they played a great defense against Clemson, but then they beat UAB, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Auburn, and that's a game they beat Auburn pretty badly. Auburn gave Alabama, Kentucky, Florida, Missouri, Tennessee. I mean, they really didn't beat anybody that you would say could challenge them.
I don't really buy that because Alabama played similar teams.
They did.
Both in the SEC.
They did. You're right.
And then the games that were the toughest games for Georgia, they dominated.
You're right.
They beat number 8 Arkansas 37-0.
You're right.
Number 18 Auburn 34-10.
Right.
Number 11 Kentucky 30-13.
Right.
Florida wasn't ranked at the time, but they're an SEC team. They're fairly good. They beat them 34-7.
Right.
I mean,
well, but then
so
what does that say about Alabama then? I mean, either Alabama's got the best coaching staff in the world that was able to make such a difference in 1 week from the Auburn game, or their players are so good that they're able to turn it on when they need to turn it on.
Yeah, that could be that latter thing could be true. I mean, Alabama knows. Think about all the championships they've won and the storied program. I think the players sometimes maybe they kind of let that get to them. Sometimes they kind of,
could be.
They kind of I don't want to say. I'm trying to find a good way to say it. Maybe they let their guard down some games.
Right.
You know what I mean? But they know when they need to turn on and they can turn on maybe. But I would have thought that Auburn game was a game they needed to turn on in, and they barely won.
Right.
I mean,
well, the funny thing is though that you mentioned that, in his post-game press conference, Nick Saban, well, he's said this all along over the last few years that the press always dumps accolades on Alabama. Alabama's the best team in the country. Alabama's this. Alabama's that. And Nick Saban says, he calls it rat poison. He says, you always pour out this rat poison, and sometimes his players buy into it and think that they can't be beaten. Yeah. But he said the rat poison that you guys gave us this week was yummy. In other words, everybody said this week, what? Alabama was a 7-point underdog. There's no way they can beat Georgia. And you're right. Maybe he was able to get the players to say, hey, guys, nobody thinks you're going to win this game.
Yeah, it says they use underdog mentality.
Right. So and it's very possible.
If that was a big factor in their win, they're not going to be underdogs if they face Georgia again.
That's true.
So especially after they beat Cincinnati 60-0.
That's true.
So well, so it's going to be more of a I guess you could say level playing field when the time comes.
That's true. That's true.
Or the tables would be turned. Georgia, who hasn't had any difficulty all year, would now be underdogs.
That's true. Yeah.
And, you see how they play then. I kind of hope Alabama. I shouldn't say hope, I guess, but I wouldn't be upset if Alabama tries to run the score on Cincinnati just to prove a point to people. Yeah. Don't put these teams in the playoff,
right?
Unless they play people during the season,
right. I
kind of hope or I wouldn't be upset if I saw them run up the score. Let me put it that way. They won't do that.
Well, I mean, they won't run it up, but I think it could get out of hand pretty quickly.
If it's close, I'll eat humble pie. I'll say, hey, good job, Cincinnati. If they keep it close, I just find it very, very, very hard to believe.
I don't either. I don't see how they're going to be able to keep. I mean.
Depends what your definition of close is, but
that's true. But
I would say that if Cincinnati's within 2 scores at halftime,
right,
I would say okay, they played. But see, again, you have to look at the final scores. They could be within 2 scores at halftime and they end up losing by 5 scores.
Right.
So I would say if they lose by 2 scores or less, I'll say,
right,
16 points or less.
Right.
Say, okay.
I mean, listen. I tip my hat to Cincinnati. They were 13-0. They deserve to be in the playoff. Okay, no question. But the only team they beat of any noteworthiness was Notre Dame. And I know our listeners can say, well, you're a Notre Dame graduate. This is it's obvious coming from you. But I watched that game. Notre Dame made some significant mistakes. Interceptions in the red zone. 1 interception returned for a touchdown. I mean, so really, I don't know that Cincinnati is really that good, okay? I mean, we don't know. Right. We're going to find out. I mean, we're going to find out on New Year's Eve.
And Notre Dame is not an SEC caliber team.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I mean, to make my point, Georgia lost by 17 to Alabama.
Right.
If Cincinnati loses by 17 or less, I said 16 initially.
Right.
Then touche. But
exactly, but it's not going to happen.
You think that's going to happen? No way. I mean, come on.
And let's look at the other game real quick.
Do you think what's I think I know the answer to this, but what do you think is the biggest problem for Cincinnati? Stopping Alabama or scoring points?
Both.
Right.
Both. The biggest problem is going to be scoring points themselves.
Okay.
I think. Okay. I mean,
I know both, but I guess my point is, would you be? Do you think that? Do you see more of a 48 to 17 score or 10, or do you see more of a 48, or do you see more of a 31 to nothing type? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be more. I think it's going to be more like 38 to 10, something like that. Okay. 45 to 10. I think Cincinnati will probably score, a late touchdown or something, but I don't see them moving the ball very effectively.
That would be interesting too. If they score some points, when do they score? Is it late in the game when it's over?
I mean, they only scored 2 touchdowns on Notre Dame. I use that game because it was the only game they won that was of any significance. Right. One of their touchdowns was a pick 6. So they only scored 2 touchdowns against Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is a better team today than they were then. I don't see them scoring 2 touchdowns against Alabama. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah. Wait, they scored 2 touchdowns against Notre Dame, one of those being...
No, they scored 3 touchdowns against Notre Dame. 2 offensive touchdowns.
Yeah, Cincinnati fans stormed the field after they beat Houston. If you're storming the field after beating Houston, then...
Yeah. Well, they knew...
I don't know. I guess another way to look at it is if you're a team that thinks has a chance to beat Alabama and to do something in the playoffs, are you going to be that excited about beating Houston in your conference championship game?
Probably not.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, probably not.
It shouldn't be that big of a deal to you, right?
Probably not. Well, here's another thing. I don't know if you realize this or not. Joseph and I were talking about this, that the Cincinnati-Houston championship game was at Cincinnati's home stadium. I mean, what does that say about your conference when you have to play the conference championship game at the home of one of your teams? All right,
that's ridiculous.
I mean, now if that game would have been in a neutral site, who knows?
I just can't wait till that game. I want to see if I'm right in my thinking or not. I just can't wait. And another thing I thought was funny before we move on, I just thought this was interesting. I noticed that all the conference championship games, they don't have any branding to them, typically.
I know. Well, yeah.
But except the Big 12, they got smart and thought, hey, we can make some money on this. And now they call it the Dr. Pepper Big 12 Championship.
The Dr. Pepper Big 12 Championship, that's right.
I'm wondering when everybody else is going to kind of get wise to that. Oh, here we go. The Subway ACC Championship.
Yeah, there you go.
That was the other one.
That was the other one, the ACC, yeah.
You think the SEC could find some Chick-fil-A SEC Championship game?
Yeah, they should. They should. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into analysis. We'll get into that prior to these games in a few weeks. But I think Georgia matches up a whole lot better with Michigan. Michigan is not a prolific passing team. They run the ball extremely well, but that's Georgia's strength, okay? I mean, if you look at the Georgia-Alabama game, Let's look at the stats real quick. I may be contradicting myself here, but if you look at the stats, Alabama only ran the ball for about 100 yards. I mean, maybe 115 yards. They passed it for over 400 yards. So I think Georgia's going to match up a whole lot better with Michigan, and I really don't see Michigan being able to beat Georgia based on the matchup. We'll see what happens. Pittsburgh, got to give them credit. They won the ACC championship with a win over Wake Forest. Baylor, big win over Oklahoma State. Had to secure it on stopping a 2-point conversion there or a touchdown play on 4th down there right at the goal line. And then Utah hammered Oregon for the second time in 3 weeks to win the big the Pac-12.
I was surprised San Diego State was ranked 19th. I think, were they undefeated? No.
I don't think so. No.
They had one loss maybe?
I think so.
They had one loss. They lost 46-13, which was strange.
Yeah. And they had one loss, yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of sets us up for the bowl games. And let's go over the bowl games real quickly. I'm just going to mention them right now. We'll talk a little more about them. And as I'm mentioning these, Nathan, you jump in at any time if you see a game that you want to make a comment about one way or the other. As I said, the bowl season will kick off on December 18th, Saturday. The Independence Bowl, Brigham Young will play Alabama-Birmingham. And also the New Orleans Bowl, Louisiana-Lafayette will play Marshall. On Tuesday, December 21st, San Diego State will play University of Texas San Antonio. They were undefeated for a while, weren't they? They did lose a game. They're 12-1 now. They must have lost their conference championship game, I guess. They're going to play in the Frisco Bowl on Tuesday, December 21st. A week after that, the bowl games will take the Christmas weekend off. Tuesday, December 28th, Auburn will play Houston in the Birmingham Bowl, and UCLA will play North Carolina State in the Holiday Bowl. On Wednesday, December 29th, Clemson and Iowa State will meet in the Cheez-It Bowl. And Oklahoma will play Oregon, which should be a good matchup in the Alamo Bowl. Thursday, December 30th, Pittsburgh will play Michigan State in the Peach Bowl. And Friday, December 31st, Wake Forest will play Texas A&M in the Gator Bowl. We also then will have our 2 semifinal games on Friday, December 31st. Alabama and Cincinnati in the Cotton Bowl, Michigan and Georgia in the Orange Bowl. And then on Saturday, January 1st, the Fiesta Bowl will be Notre Dame and Oklahoma State. The Outback Bowl, Penn State and Arkansas. The Citrus Bowl, Iowa and Kentucky. The Rose Bowl, Ohio State and Utah. The Sugar Bowl, Baylor and Ole Miss. The New Year's 6 bowls. There's 6 bowl games that rotate the semifinals every year. The New Year's 6 bowls are the Orange Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, the Rose Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, and I want to say the Peach Bowl. So those are your 6 New Year's 6 bowls that will rotate every year, the semifinal games. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I think bowl season will be a little interesting. I think Notre Dame, speaking of my alma mater, I think they have a chance to finish maybe 3rd. If they beat Oklahoma State, Cincinnati lose. 2 of those teams up there are going to lose, obviously, in the semifinals. So I think Notre Dame has a chance to finish their season 11-1 or 12-1 and maybe a top 3 ranking, which is pretty good for a team that went into the season with considered to be a down year. So we'll see. I mean, I think Ohio State and Utah, I'm looking forward to seeing that game only because, Ohio State, we're going to find out if Utah's any good. I mean, or if the Pac-12 is as weak as we thought it was. And Baylor and Ole Miss should be a pretty good game as well. Baylor with a very prolific offense, Ole Miss with a prolific offense. I think defense will be the key to that game in the Sugar Bowl, which will be the final bowl game on New Year's night. So bowl season's coming up. We have our top 4 teams. And any final thoughts, Nathan, about what we've talked about so far?
No, not really.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So that's it for college football in the year 2021. We will be back with you with a college football show in a couple weeks. Once Christmas is over, we will get together and we will preview the semifinal games for you, Alabama, Cincinnati, Georgia, Michigan. We'll also review the bowl games that have been conducted prior to that date, and we'll get thick into bowl season. So we've enjoyed bringing you the college football recap each and every week. We've got one more to go, maybe 2 more. We'll recap it after the season is completely over. But that's going to be the Press Box Podcast for this week. Remember to hit us up on Twitter at PressBoxPod. We put lots of tweets out. We want to hear your information. We want to hear what you have to say. We're also on Instagram at PressBoxPod. And then, of course, our YouTube channel, the Press Box Podcast. Nathan does a tremendous job, lots of hard work putting that stuff up there. Full episodes as well as some of the best clips from some of our most favorite shows. So that's it for the Press Box Podcast. We've enjoyed bringing it to you, and we'll see you next time.